This morning's gospel reading is from the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 to 30, which may start to sound a tad familiar. For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. The one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you have handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reaped where I did not sow, gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given. They will have an abundance, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. So for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
I want to share with you a little known fact about me. I love watches. Now, I don't switch out often, but I have enough watches that I could wear a different one every day and not repeat for a while. It's kind of a little obsession of mine. So I will never forget the day I bought it. It was 15 years ago when I walked into this local thrift shop that I usually frequented, and they were holding it aside for me because they knew I liked watches. It was beautiful. 14-karat gold pocket watch. I could tell it was old. It had nobody's engravings or monograms or inscriptions on it. It also didn't work. So I took it to the jeweler. The jeweler got it working. He dated it to 1914 and appraised it. We'll just say I got a really good deal that morning. So I was a little crushed yesterday when, as a result of my own fault, my pocket watch fell out of my pocket, crashed to the floor, shattering the crystal. And I spent the rest of the day worrying about it. Would I be able to get it fixed? Did glass get into the clock works? Could it even be repaired? And as soon as the bazaar was over, I left church because I had to get to the jeweler yesterday before they closed, and he could fix it. just in time for Christmas when I like to wear it with my red vest. And then I thought about the words of that song we just sang. My worth is not in what I own. Those words really sank in yesterday. And it made me think how silly I was being. It was just a watch. It wasn't even a family heirloom. I just happened upon it in a thrift shop one day. And then I looked up the refrain from that song. I rejoice in my Redeemer, greatest treasure, wellspring of my soul. I will trust in him no other. My soul is satisfied in him alone. But that word, trust, just burned into my soul. Because during this sermon series, over the last few weeks, we have been exploring together how the world measures success versus how God measures success. And this song we just sang was kind of the theme song for this series. I rejoice in my Redeemer, my greatest treasure, wellspring of my soul. I will trust in him no other. My soul is satisfied in him alone. The series just boils down to one important question we've been asking you to wrestle with. When it comes to our relationships, our priorities, our time, and our finances, is Jesus Lord of them all? In other words, do I trust God alone in all of these different areas of my life? And the series reminded me of something we often forget. It reminded me that God doesn't require us to be successful. God is only asking us to be faithful. That's really what's at the heart of the parable of the talents we heard today, faithfulness. Now, we often hear it watered down. Sherry did one of the interpretations people often use because we don't want to step on people's toes. So we talk about talents being those things that we're good at, our skills and our abilities. We have a talent for music or cooking or making crafts. But also, as she said, to those who had originally heard this parable, they would have known that talent in its original form meant money. It meant a large sum of money. Now, it's cute. We hand out little gold coins. There's your talent, Dan. Don't lose it. I need it the next two services. But actually, a talent was formed into a huge block of gold. It was very heavy. They even included a handle at the top of the block so it would be easier to transport. Each talent weighed approximately 75 pounds. So let me do the math by today's standards. 16 ounces in a pound, 75 pounds, that's 1,200 ounces. Based on the price of gold this morning at $1,297.10. Don't worry, I Googled it. And then I used my calculator. A talent in today's market would be worth $1,556,520. Just one of those blocks. That's 16 and a half years of someone's salary. So, giving each of his servants one or more talents, the master in the story is entrusting them with a fortune. So this parable really isn't about our abilities. It really isn't about money. This parable is about something even more important. This parable is about trust. And it opens with an act of trust. The master is going on a long journey, and he entrusts 3 of his servants with his wealth, and he gives to each of them a different amount of money. And it's a large amount, whether it's the 1 talent or the 2 talents or the 5 talents. And it's clear that the master trusts these servants because he hands over the money without any instructions. He doesn't tell any of the servants to go invest it or go hide it. He just gives it to them. And after a long absence, the master returns. He calls his 3 servants back together, and 2 have doubled the money, and the third made nothing at all. He returns to the master exactly what the master gave to him because he buried it in the ground. Now, Ethan, here's the good news. It was a common practice in Jesus' day to bury money in the ground. It was a common security measure to go hide it. So he wasn't doing anything that wasn't out of the norm for his time period. What was out of the norm is the reason why he buried the money. He didn't bury it for security's sake. He buried it out of fear. He didn't trust his master. So I often wonder, how would the master have responded if the first 2 servants didn't make a profit? What if they had risked his money and when he returned, they came back empty-handed, that they had lost it all? And as I thought about it, I think he still would have been pleased because he wasn't praising them because they made a profit. He praised them because he could trust them. He praised them because they were faithful. Listen to that response he gave to the first 2 servants again. His master said to him, "Well done, good and trustworthy," or good and faithful slave. "You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." And then when he responds to the third servant, the master makes it clear he would have accepted anything, even the meager amount of interest from a savings account, as long as that servant was motivated by faith, not by fear. But that third servant wasn't willing to act out of trust. He was afraid of his master. The master, however, trusts his servants, and 2 of them act on that trust. They return the favor by reaping a profit and coming back with a fortune stacked upon another fortune. And that third servant, he painted a very ugly picture of the master as a grouch, a greedy man who was demanding success. But nowhere in the story does it say he demanded success. Just handed it over. The master in reality was being generous and empowering his servants to take a risk because he was willing to take a risk with them. And it's the master's love and generosity that overcomes their fear, not anything he tells them to do. I think as I've been reading this parable, it turns the way the world measures success upside down. It reminds us the worst thing that can happen to us is not failure. The worst thing that can happen to us is that we make God out to be a grumpy old grouch who is angry at us every time we fail. The worst thing that can happen isn't losing out. The worst thing that can happen is never taking the risk. You see, in the eyes of God, the treasure that is kept hidden in the ground is an act of atheism. But the freedom that puts the treasure at risk, that may even result in a loss, is an act of faith. You see, we don't learn from fear. We learn from our failures. However, when you read through the Gospels, it is filled of stories of people who live in fear. There's the story of the prodigal son where the spiteful elder brother refuses to welcome his younger brother, the prodigal, home. There is the all-day workers who demand that the late workers receive less than a full day's pay. There is the Pharisee who prays to God for God to accept him because he's followed all the rules, not because God is merciful. And each of those stories and many others in the Gospels, they're living in a gray and fearful world where grace is absent and God's love is conditional. But this parable of the talents is a story of investments, wise investments and not so wise investments. It's also a story of worldviews. On the one hand, there's the worldview of scarcity, that there's not enough and I need to get all that I can, or there is the worldview of abundance, that there is plenty to go around. And we gather to worship a God of abundance, not a God of scarcity. This doesn't mean that we are trusting in God for a new Mercedes or a luxury yacht. We're trusting that God is present and active in this world, and we don't need to fear the world around us. It's fear that keeps us from living with hope. It's fear that keeps us from loving and embracing our neighbor. It's fear that keeps us from dreaming God-sized dreams. It's fear that keeps us from investing our lives in the work of God. It's fear that keeps us from sharing our resources with others. But the good news of Jesus Christ gives new meaning to success and security. Success isn't measured by the amount we can accumulate, that we gather more than we could ever possibly use on our own. Security isn't found in keeping pace with our paranoia. It's found in the utterly reliable God who trusts us before we trust ourselves, who's taken a risk on us and asks us to take a risk as well. See, life is like the parable of the talents. It's a story about trust and risk-taking. And what turns out to be important isn't our money or our abilities, but our decision to use whatever we have in ways that show our willingness to risk and our ability to trust God. The central question isn't, what have I accomplished? The central question in life isn't, what have I accumulated? The central question is whether or not we've learned to trust, whether or not we've learned to love, whether or not Jesus is Lord, not just on Sunday mornings, but throughout the rest of the week, throughout the entirety of our lives.